Well, ladies and gentlemen, we got a big update yesterday with Donald Trump now declaring Antifa a terrorist organization in the reaction to the Charlie Kirk assassination. This is a political maneuver by Trump that some people are a little bit confused by because Antifa doesn't have any formal structured leadership. So, how is this going to work in terms of what Trump and the administration want to do against Antifa, which again mainly operates in some anonymous gray area ways? What is the way to attack this? And really, what are we going to find with these investigations? And how can the Republicans really shut down some of this crazy leftist rhetoric when it comes to the stuff that creates a Tyler Robinson? Let's see what Trump said yesterday via Truth Social. I am pleased to inform our many USA patriots that I am designating Antifa, a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster, as a major terrorist organization. And this is the really key part when it comes to something like Antifa, because again, there's no real leadership within Antifa in terms of them being an actual party. The point is, there are many different funding apparatuses that very likely trickle down to Antifa. And that, through designating the organization or the thought of Antifa, designating that a terrorist threat, or you want to argue, well, domestic versus foreign, it's different. It's more so a terror threat than an organization themselves in terms of something like Al Qaeda or ISIS versus Antifa, because Antifa is domestic, although there are operations I've seen in Canada and some few other countries. The idea here, and Trump says it, and he said this before, they're going to be investigating the funding mechanisms of Antifa. He says they're going to be thoroughly investigated in accordance with the highest legal standard practices. And so that is really what's key when it comes to this, because people are wondering what's the next step when it comes to Antifa. They've got no actual leadership. Antifa, you could argue they've been more so irrelevant the past 4 or 5 years. But the idea is that there's a lot of funding trickle down, and this is just how political funding works, from one organization to the next, to the next, to the next. And then at a certain point, it gets to Antifa or Antifa adjacent organizations. And I think you're going to be hearing a lot about that, especially when it comes to a potential trial, as it looks like Tyler Robinson is obviously still alive. They're looking to try and pin the death penalty on him. And there's going to be probably a lot of investigation when it comes to even just fact-finding during the trial and the potential radicalization of Robinson. And I'm sure there's a lot of spider webs that can tie very rich people to the potential funding in a trickle-down effect of someone like Tyler Robinson in terms of him developing the beliefs that he currently has at this point, to where he thinks it's acceptable to eliminate Charlie Kirk. And so what I would say is, when it comes to designating Antifa as a terrorist organization, the idea is it's a mechanism to thoroughly investigate not just Antifa in terms of the funding, but the funding sources and then their sources of funding. And so it's a more widespread, wider umbrella in terms of trying to cut off the funding. Trump's already made threats against George Soros, saying it's a RICO case, along with other big name leftists, people that are very far to the left in terms of funding these things. I mean, it's come out and there's been investigations against Soros with him funding left-wing organizations that are basically just adjutants to spew more division in the United States. And they'll also fund very far left candidates. And then, the more moderate will win, but it's still a very far left person in liberal districts. And so I think what's important to understand when it comes to something like Antifa, it is different domestically that versus foreign. But the thought is that, well, this will give Trump and the administration more justification and more power when it comes to looking into how a lot of these leftist organizations are funded. And the idea is you cut off the funding source, the entire thing splinters. and it becomes very, very hard for them to stage events, stage protests, things of that nature without the direct funding sources. We see this all the time when it comes to a lot of these protests against Donald Trump. Just like the No Kings protest, that's a lot of money that's required to do things like that. You don't just do that spontaneously in terms of getting that many people together. And it was, I mean, I don't think the protests really do anything against Trump, but there is a lot of funding involved in that, and it's meant to be an extremely negative thing against Trump. Like, look at how many people are out protesting, and they do use that as propaganda against Trump when it comes to these protests that happen as a way to say, well, Trump is not very popular. There's all these protests that happen against him, and it's fully funded, obviously. And a lot of it is very old people now going out, as we've seen with the No Kings protest back in, I want to say June, mid-June. So there's obviously a major liberal funding apparatus. The question is how much of it falls under the umbrella in maybe a trickle-down way. How much of that money touches these further leftist organizations, Antifa, because again, Antifa, in terms of political activity, at least in the modern scope and kind of the bigger stage, we haven't seen a ton of it. Now, we know there was a lot of damage during BLM, and that's another thing that's just insane to me. And I've already talked about how ridiculous it is now. It's become this argument after Charlie Kirk was assassinated by a clear leftist. They're saying, well, based off of studies that we found, liberals are saying this, there's far more political violence by the right against the left. And of course, the studies cite very singular incidents, which are not even comparable. Like, you're going to compare some random person doing something against another random person to Charlie Kirk being assassinated, like those two hold the same exact weight in the political scope. The naivety of that is astounding, that would even be close to a comparison. And I've said Donald Trump has had, at this point, I've been underselling it. Donald Trump has had a gun pointed at his face now twice within the last 2 years. The golf course assassination attempt, along with Butler. And those are clear liberals, 100%. They tried muddying the waters. And then this one, they tried muddying again. But this one is obviously a lot bigger because an assassination did happen with Charlie Kirk, and it was a clear leftist. So when it comes to the upper echelon leaders, it's always one-sided. It's not like liberals are facing anything like that. And so that's what people have to understand. I kind of lost my train of thought there. I don't know what the original point I was trying to make. But I think it was based around like the idea that Republicans commit more political violence. It's completely disingenuous. And the studies are manipulated, but it doesn't even matter. When you're talking about the top Democrats versus the top Republicans, it's not even close. And so Trump, as a byproduct of what just happened, this assassination, there's going to be a significant reaction. One of the top right-wing conservative propagandists, debaters, commentators was assassinated with a conservative in the White House, with conservatives in full control of the executive branch. There's going to be a significant reaction one way or another. And that's the point. And so where do we go from here? Well, I think Trump says it even in just this tweet. The point of it is to investigate the funding sources and the trickle down in political funding that potentially reaches Antifa, and hitting those people with something if you can somehow prove that Tyler Robinson was radicalized by money that previously came from very rich liberal donors. And then those people get investigated. And that funding gets investigated to the point to where the government might take action against it. And I'm guessing that's what probably comes of something like this. You know, there will be a trial. We will see a lot of the evidence, hopefully within a year. With the U.S. judiciary system, it tends to take a while. But that is kind of my reaction to Antifa. And then people say, well, it's different. You know, you can't label them a terrorist organization because it's domestic. Well, they can be labeled a terror group or a terror threat. They're a domestic terror threat. That's what the administration wants to do in light of the assassination against Kirk. And again, it's more of a tool for an investigation into liberal funding sources and the liberal funding mechanisms, which could potentially be cut off, and it could hurt. I mean, ideally, this would turn into really looking into these colleges. I mean, it is just mind-blowing how our universities are in terms of the liberal bias. It is any study you see, the professors are going to be 95 at least percent liberal. I mean, it is not even close. And you would think, well, we're preparing these kids for the real world. Let's give them professors that lean to the left. In most cases, a lot of them, the far left, at a 95% rate. Yeah, that's really the real world. That's really how the real world is in the United States. Obviously, it's a lot more 50-50 than that. That's why a lot of young women who are basically completely naive to any politics come into college and become very, very liberal very quickly. It's a breeding ground of the left, unfortunately, when it comes to that. But I don't really know how you would relate that back to universities. I just think that's an entirely different issue. And I don't think a university had anything to do with Robinson. This is all online stuff. And the wonder is, well, maybe Antifa was involved with this in a certain way. It's a political move by Trump to once this happens, this terrible assassination, and especially them, like, the other thing is a lot of these normal people celebrating it. There is this thought on the left that it is acceptable for someone to be killed if they don't agree with you, or if you deem them to be having dangerous thoughts. Like, individual people should be the sole decider on if I think your thoughts are too dangerous, and if I think they're too radical, and if I think you're a fascist. Many of these people don't even know what a fascist is. The idea that they would call Charlie Kirk a fascist, or Trump, but even especially Kirk, is insane. And so it's just this thought that they think it's acceptable for someone to be assassinated, someone to be killed, them not to be sad, them to actually celebrate it on TikTok. I mean, how bold is that with their face? So it's more so, the question is, why is this thinking on the left so widespread to a lot of the normies, by the way? Oh, that's why these people are getting, these are all normal people. This is not like a 20-year-old. It's like, oh, these Antifa 20-year-old kids who are communists and they're going to grow out of it. It's like 42-year-old white women who are celebrating Kirk's assassination. This is an obvious thought on the left. Now, how did this come about? How did we get here? A lot of this goes back to the lack of self-blame and accountability. They would just say, well, Trump forced us here. Trump is so radical and so fascist. That's the reason we've arrived at this thought to thinking people should be murdered for words. And if there's no accountability, there's not going to be any change. And so I think that's the point. We'll see what happens with Antifa. I think they're going to be looking, and this is the justification, and this is the mandate, looking into all the leftist organizations and the funding apparatuses in which they receive money. So there is that. And you can see this just talks about the trickle down, political money. You can see, wait until we find out one of Biden's final acts was awarding the man funding Antifa the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And that's Soros' son who's like going, remember Soros' son taking pictures with all the Democrats in almost a way to introduce them to the leftist funding sources, and in kind of a funny way to say, I own you, during the DNC. And it was all the top Democrats, all of the ones that are against billionaires, taking a photo with him. It's like a trophy photo almost. It's like, this, it's like he's bragging about it. And so we'll see if Trump declares some type of war against Soros. Is there a way to prove that his funding directly led to some serious violence? I mean, that's, I think, the goal in terms of that. And we'll see what ends up happening there. There was also this is very strange. So this is the Prime Minister of Israel official account, Benjamin Netanyahu, releasing a statement on Charlie Kirk 14 hours ago. There's been theories, not surprisingly, I'm sure not surprising to Israel, that Israel was involved in the assassination. Many people have come out, myself included, and said it doesn't look like it based off the evidence. I don't think Israel was involved. Charlie Kirk still liked Israel, even though there were some cracks in his support towards the end of his life. And Benjamin Netanyahu was asked in a very strange manner during an interview right after Kirk's death if Israel had anything to do with it. And it was very odd that Israel would even allow Netanyahu to to even be asked that question, because it's such a, with things like this and conspiracies like this, the best way to treat them is to not give them oxygen so you don't respond to them. Well, now here's yet Netanyahu a week after Kirk's death responding and saying, of course, we had nothing to do with Charlie Kirk being killed. Now, I would just equate this to horrible PR. Why would this be needed if you're Israel? If anything, this just makes you look guilty to a degree, and I don't believe Israel is involved. But this is just very odd that you would release this a week later, when the only way in which these theories really spread is through something like this, Netanyahu coming out and saying, we had nothing to do with it, we swear. Just let it die. People are only going to get more intrigued into this theory the more, especially somebody like Netanyahu talks about it. And Netanyahu has made statements in a way to try and use Charlie Kirk's death to further the relationship and the idea of Judo-Christianity, and it does seem very disingenuous. So I just thought the post was very odd. Why they thought this was a good idea to record Netanyahu doing this, there's no way that this would have turned out, especially with the social media sentiment on Israel at this point. There's no way this was going to turn out well for them to make this statement. When you've got something like that, a theory like that, which shouldn't surprise Israel at all, because to a lot of people, they're going to get blamed for everything. And there was a little bit of smoke with Charlie Kirk maybe having a few meetings and trying to, thinking about turning on Israel in private. But Charlie Kirk was still a supporter of Israel, even in his final interviews. So, I don't know. I just thought this post was very, very strange. So either way, guys, Donald Trump declaring Antifa a terrorist organization. And so, yeah, they're a terror watch group, and it's more so the funding. I mean, they say they're not an organization, but they've got you can see the flags and everything like that, and the BLM stuff, and something like that should never happen again, where they organize with BLM and terrorize American cities in the name of some type of social justice. And so Trump doing this in the response to the Charlie Kirk assassination, I don't think it surprises anyone. That was really one of the first theories that came out. Well, he's going to try and designate Antifa a terrorist organization. What does that look like? Well, it looks like probably a lot of rigorous investigation into leftist funding apparatuses. That's what I would assume. And remember, there will also be investigation just because of the trial, because Tyler Robinson is alive, and they will be seeking the death penalty against him. So there's going to have to be an investigation in terms of state of mind when it comes to Robinson and why he thought it was justified to murder Charlie Kirk. Who told him it would be justified, or who put that in his head that, hey, Charlie Kirk is so bad and what he says is so terrible that he deserves, or he should be, shot. And we know Tyler Robinson said some type of hatred cannot be negotiated with. And just judging from the text messages, the argument is, oh, he's the only one that did it. Look at the messages. It's a spontaneous thing that he thought of just a week ago. Well, it's all going to be investigated. And I'm sure the left would love that, by the way. That's like the best outcome possible for them. If they conclude that, oh, this is just something random and he's just a leftist and he kept it all in. He wasn't a member of any group or Discord. I mean, obviously that seems to be false based on what's reported. Seems like there was a lot of, Discord groups at play here. But they would love nothing more than, oh, he spontaneously only planned this for a week and randomly did this and didn't even tell his trans lover. So we'll have to see what ends up happening in terms of that. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you like the video down below. Also follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.